Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View on this Wednesday, February 7, 2018 day. I am Nick Pitts, and this is Point of View. And I am joined in studio today by Kerby Anderson. Kerby, how are you?
I am doing well. What day is it today?
Welcome to the Millennial Roundtable.
Yes.
Today's National Signing Day for college recruits
Oh,
right
okay,
now.
there
So
you
many
go.
of college
Football.
fans are recognizing that Vanderbilt University will again underperform.
And Alabama will succeed.
Yeah, we are living in the midst of a dynasty we will always continue to be reminded of. But we are so grateful that you decided to join us today on this Wednesday, February 7th, 2018 day. And we've got a packed show for you today, as always. And so we're going to be talking about everything from David Brooks's article in the New York Times this past week that talked about the abortion memo, of specifically trying to broaden the base and trying to create a bigger tent within the Democratic Party. We'll be talking a little bit about that and, again, some of the reaction that came from that, from everything from Slate to Huffington Post to Tony Perkins, to just a variety of individuals that have decided to chime in on that. We'll be talking about that, as well as Dennis Prager wrote a piece in townhall.com, A Defense for Evangelicals Who Support President Trump, and just kind of went after those individuals that I guess would identify as never Trumpers. And so we'll be kind of discussing that. Is it really just a rationale for evangelicals to support, or is it an understanding to turn a blind eye to some of the indiscretions of President Trump's former life? We'll be talking about that, as well as a daddy-daughter dance that was canceled in New York. So butterfly kisses, no more, with this daddy-daughter dance that was canceled up in New York due to gender-neutral policy. We'll be talking a little bit about that, but as always, we will be taking your phone calls as well. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And Kerby, because it is the Millennial Roundtable, just like every
Facebook.
other show, we're going to continue to emphasize the idea that we are on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Again, that's facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And you can go ahead and tune in there. You can see us and you can see that myself, not Kerby, has a face for radio, which unfortunately makes this very keenly aware when you're tuning into the Facebook. But also you can go ahead and leave a comment or a message or a like or a share on the Facebook page, and we'll be sure to share that over air, and we'll talk about your comment or your question that you might have. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So David Brooks, Kerby, wrote an article last week. I mean, he really did. He went after all the controversial issues.
Yes,
last
I
week.
guess he did. He really did take it on. Let me just explain to everybody, and we could post this, but you can find it very easily. It's called the Abortion Memo to Democratic Party leaders. And he basically was asking, in a sense, Democrats, kind of saying we, so we'll put him in the we category. Why is it we make such a big deal about abortion, especially after watching this vote on the pain-capable abortion bill that went down to defeat in the Senate? And you're seeing all sorts of things like one senator saying, if women made up 51% of Congress, do you think we'd still be fighting to protect a woman's right to choose? Well, this has to do with banning abortions after 20 weeks. There are only 7 countries in the world that don't have some kind of major restriction after 20 weeks. United States, China, North Korea. Is that the list you want to be in?
Yeah,
and so that's kind of what he's saying. And he's saying also, because we've made this so extreme that even our donors want to preserve the woman's right to choose through all 9 months of pregnancy, are we shooting ourselves in the foot, is what he's basically saying to his fellow Democrats.
You know, it was really fascinating, Kerby, because, again, he wrote this in kind of a Brooks satirical way, one might say. So that I think rubbed in.
And I don't think people got the point. Go ahead.
So if
you and I enjoy reading him. Some people just, they don't get him, right?
He's got a tongue-in-cheek way that some would say is condescending, others would say is snarky, but he really does. I mean, you read any of his books, Paradise Drive, Bobo's in Paradise. I mean, it really, you do see a little bit of that snark in it. And so he wrote it as an imaginary consultant.
Yes.
He called it the abortion memo. So obviously he's not a consultant to the Democratic Party. He's just an imaginary consultant and really asking them to expand the base. And I'll quote at length a paragraph here because I think it's really important for us to see kind of some of the scope and scale and then just some of the hard numbers that are not imaginary. Hashtag, they're not fake news. And so to quote Brooks, his second to last paragraph, he says, quote, "We also shouldn't take millennial voters for granted. Boomers saw the pro-choice movement as integral to their feminism. Millennials do not. In 1991, 36% of young voters thought abortion should be legal in all circumstances. Now, only 24%. Young voters don't like the Republican total ban, but they don't like our position either. Moreover, young pro-choice voters are much more ambivalent or apathetic than young pro-life ones." And so what he's continuing to show is that, one, the base is shrinking that really does want abortion available after 20 weeks. And two, that base that you're catering to is already apathetic in the first place, and they're not voting. Which, again, Kerby, these are numbers that are probably our listeners are very keenly aware of the growing movement among millennials that are pro-life.
Well, and again, since this is the Millennial Roundtable, let's mention that your generation, the millennial generation, is probably more pro-life than any generation that has preceded it. And at the same time, they're a little bit ambivalent. They're not sure they want a total ban on abortion. And even if you were to overturn Roe versus Wade, which he points out here, would simply go back to the states. So they aren't completely turned off by the Republican position. But as more and more of this evidence surfaces about how extreme you have to be to remain in the Democratic Party, that's not working with the younger demographic either, is it?
And so millennials largely are opposed to abortion, largely identify as pro-life, which is just really fascinating because, again, from a millennial standpoint, you have to understand that there are two instances that really do characterize millennials. It's the idea of the fight for justice, because we saw a previous generation have a civil rights movement, and we don't want to miss out on our civil rights movement, so there's just this fight for justice. And the second component you have to understand is that millennials are highly relational individuals. And because of technological advances, we understand the truth that there is a person that's living inside of this. We are the selfie-taking, Uber-riding, student debt-accumulating individuals, and so we like to take selfies and we like to see pictures. And what ultrasounds are doing is it's allowing you to be able to see pictures of children, and there's just this intrinsic need inside of us to want to fight for that. And so what we continue to see with millennials is because we're seeing these pictures, among many other reasons, there's this fight that we're willing to do, and we're recognizing the truth. One, we don't want to allow late-term abortions. And two is the idea that we want to fight for those individuals to be that voice for the voiceless, as it says in the biblical narrative.
One other article that he mentions there, and it's a really good argument, is how did we get to the point where the Democratic Party was so hostile to life inside the womb? He quotes Ted Kennedy. I remember years ago when I was at Georgetown, I got a chance to meet Richard John Newhouse. You may know who that is. And he, again, a former Democrat who eventually became part of kind of the new conservative movement, was saying, I think of these individuals that marched with me to protest the Vietnam War, these individuals that fought for rights for the poor and the downtrodden. This is what the Democratic Party was. How did we all of a sudden have a party that was against having some protection for life inside the womb? And so here he even quotes from Ted Kennedy back in 1971, and almost all of them, whether it was Al Gore or Ted Kennedy or a variety of other individuals that all at one time were pro-life, but then had to change because the Democratic Party said you have to toe the line on this issue of abortion.
And so this article has just spurned a lot of responses.
Oh, yes.
And so we're going to get to some of those responses when we get back from the break, but we'd also like to hear from you. 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212, as well as Facebook.com/PointOfViewRadio. We'll expand some of the options and responses when we get back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Last month, the Department of Health and Human Services announced the creation of a new division within the Office of Civil Rights. There will now be a Conscience and Religious Freedom Division. The division will protect doctors, nurses, and other healthcare providers from being coerced into participating in activities that violate their consciences, such as abortion, sterilization, and assisted suicide. The proposed rules will empower the division to actually enforce multiple statutes that have been passed by Congress and signed by presidents of both parties. Unfortunately, the Obama administration unilaterally and unlawfully ignored and often undermined these regulations. The ACLU, as you might imagine, has criticized the formation of the division and even threatened legal action. Last year, the ACLU filed numerous lawsuits attacking religious accommodations in a number of cases ranging from birth control mandates to adoption. Another group that protested the announcement was Lambda Legal, fearing that this would have a negative impact on the LGBT community. This makes no sense since the division is to enforce existing law concerning health care and has nothing to do with homosexual or transgender issues. The rule mentions abortion 155 times, suicide 29 times. How many times does it mention the words LGBT or transgender? That would be 0. This new division does not deserve this criticism. It will be empowered to enforce laws that have been on the books for decades but were ignored or sometimes even rewritten by the previous administration. The head of this new division understands religious liberty because he previously worked for the First Liberty Institute. He and his agency will bring a needed corrective. Healthcare workers should not be compelled to take innocent life, even if abortion is legal. They should not be forced to participate in assisted suicide, even if it's legal in some states. That is why we need this new division. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From PureFlix, the biblical story of the last of the Hebrew judges, Samson. Rated PG-13, Samson. In theaters February 16th. Information at samson.movie.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back on Point of View on this Wednesday, February 7th, 2018 day. I am Nick Pitts, and I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable of this Point of View show today by Kerby Anderson. And we have been talking about David Brooks and his piece from last week that was talked about the abortion memo, kind of channeling the idea that he's an imaginary consultant. He really is asking for the Democratic Party to expand the base, and to be able to expand the base is really to allow pro-lifers into the movement and quit being so intransigent on this whole idea of abortion. And Kerby, you were highlighting right before we were talking, or right before when we went off air, rather, the idea that there used to be a day that Democrats had pro-life. They were the champions of kind of this issue, right?
Yeah, and I'd love to hear from some of our pro-life Democrats. Do you feel like you have a connection with the Democratic Party? Because they always talk about a big tent, and in the Republican Party, you really do have a big tent. You do have some pro-choice Republicans, even if the platform is pro-life. In the Democratic Party, you have to start saying, when was the last time you had a pro-life Democrat speak at the National Convention? And I would think that might be Governor Casey from Pennsylvania. And that goes back to about the time when you were in grade school. That is a long, long time ago. And then when you see some of these tweets that come from Senator Gillibrand and Senator Harris and some of these others that all make it sound like, no, we're in the mainstream. Well, no, you're not, because you can actually find all sorts of statistics that show that 80% of the country, in one of these surveys, a Gallup one in particular, opposes abortion in the final months of pregnancy. So when we start talking about the fact there's only a few countries in the world that don't have some restrictions on abortion after 20 weeks, recognize that a child born prematurely after about 22 weeks You can find them in a neonatology ward. And to just say, we're not going to do anything to protect those individuals, and then that becomes essentially the de facto policy of the Democratic Party. I'd love to hear from some of our callers about that.
Yeah, so you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number's 800-351-1212. And we're also on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. You can leave a comment or a question, and we'll share that on air as well. So we're going to jump over on the phone lines right now. We've got Linda on the line. Linda, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Linda from New Mexico. What is your point of view?
I just have a comment. I wanted to comment and say that you guys do an amazing job. You guys always are very encouraging, and no matter what, you guys are very encouraging. And it's a nail on the head, and you guys do a great job. And I just wanted to thank you guys.
Well, thank
We'll
you
take
so
a
much.
compliment.
Yeah, we'll take a compliment. You know,
We might get a few criticisms in a few minutes. We'll take the compliment start. That sounds good.
Thank you so much, Linda. Especially when you go over on Facebook and kind of get some of those interesting comments. And I won't name any names or anything, but it's just fascinating, just some of the things that individiwans will say over the screen. But nevertheless, we're so grateful for your encouragement, Linda. And one of the things that we always want to do here at Point of View is we want to be distinctly Christian. And what we believe to be true about Christianity is it's, especially when you're engaging in the public square, you always want to look for the best and try to redeem the worst. And so on this abortion issue, I think one of the important things that we need to consider is there's a rationale as to why the other side holds this particular point of view. And so what we want to do is to best understand and represent that side, but then too, hopefully to be able to reason, as our God has called us, this understanding of reasoning together about the other side. You know, Kerby, some of the responses have just been very interesting.
You can't even read the words that are used by these people on the air. The FCC would come down on my shoulders instantaneously. So let me just say that any nasty thing you could ever think to say about a columnist like David Brooks has been said. And so that's one category. Then I saw another one. You've probably seen this too, where some of them then kind of go, oh, tut, you don't understand. You're a man, so you don't understand what it's like to be pregnant, or you don't understand the kind of crisis the woman who wanted to get an abortion after 30 weeks would go through. And so either it is just as mean-spirited as you can possibly imagine, or it's just sort of looking down your nose saying, you know, you're a real idiot. No, it's so funny because people, up until a few days ago, I think actually liked David Brooks. All of a sudden, you cross the line on the issue of abortion, and you are as worse an enemy as Donald Trump himself. It's just amazing how that happened.
It was fascinating because last week, Kerby and I were joking. He just took on every controversial issue that he could. On Tuesday, he releases his column on Tuesdays and Fridays, and on Tuesday he took on the immigration issue,
right,
and really did go to town on Republicans specifically for having up these walls and just saying that immigrants need to be welcome, almost insinuating, some would argue, is that he was just saying amnesty for all 12 million individuals. And then on Friday, he goes after the Democratic Party, and he says, why in the world, because I'm an imaginary consultant, are you trying to limit your party base by continuing to just really be reactionary and really be shunning the pro-life individual that wants to be a Democrat? But what I found was so interesting, Kerby, is what you talked about, is just the variety of responses that have come from this. And there's a Huffington Post that you forwarded my way, which I thought was so interesting, and I'll quote here, because really she's arguing from that empirical standpoint. Because you're not a woman, one, and two, because you don't know what I go through, you can't speak on the issue. And so the part, she says, we hear you, Brooks. Anecdotes are not data. But how many gut-wrenching stories published in mainstream media and personal blogs do you need to read before you realize that an abortion after 20 weeks is often an unwanted procedure of last resort? And again, what she's doing is she's highlighting particular instances, yes, but what she fails to do, Kerby, is she assumes that the individual in the womb is not a child.
Well, of course.
When in reality, it's a child in there, Kerby. It's a child.
And again, I agree that some people don't necessarily see it as a human being from the moment of conception, which I think is what the Bible teaches. But I think everybody, like you said before, that looks in a sonogram and sees a baby hiccuping and moving, reacting to pain, and all sorts of other things, being able to hear music. And that was the other thing that was kind of striking, because he spent some time really kind of educating us about what we now understand in terms of that. Late in the term, they recognize words, tunes, languages. They seem to be crying on the 28th week. He's saying, for anybody that has eyes to see, And since the sonograms have given us a window to the womb, these look like babies. And then to say, oh, no, but even up to the moment of delivery, we could still kill that child inside the womb. That really just crosses so many moral issues and emotional issues that people have. And to then say that's going to be the stated policy, essentially the de facto policy of the Democratic Party, that's just not a winning strategy here in the 2018 elections.
And so there's the other side. So what we're continuing to see is that there's two sides to this, obviously, or I guess there's a variety of sides, but two primary sides that are highlighted. The reason, I would argue, one of the reasons why evangelicals are so strident when it comes to pro-life issues is because they believe you're murdering children. Like the idea of you murdering one of their children it's just unconscionable to think about. And so the reason why they're so strident towards that, we evangelicals, is because we believe you're murdering children.
That's why they show up in the polls to vote, too.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. And then there's the other side that says that the woman's right to choose. And one of the ways that the woman's right to choose is because because they understand, one, it could be a variety of factors that the mother doesn't want the child, or two, there's the child. I think this is probably the line of thinking that they'll move on, is that the child will not be set up to be able to live a fully healthy life at the very forefront. And this was illuminated in one of the articles Kerby sent me from Slate magazine, and I'll again quote it right here, because this is really the heart of her argument. She writes, quote, "I assume, Mr. Brooks, that you've not witnessed the death of a child whose lungs aren't developed. It's agonizing. If you had, you might realize that these procedures are hard and should be viewed as such." Well, again, like we want to insert grace here and recognize that this is children that we're talking about, and then mothers are just naturally closer to children because they obviously bear children for a significant period of time. But again, you're operating under the assumption that we don't think that you're operating on the assumption that the child is not a viable being in the womb right now. And it's just really important for both sides to be able to see that, right?
Well, I think so. And again, back to one of the lines that I use so often when I speak about Christian ethics, bad ethics or bad cases make bad ethics. And so, yes, we recognize some children are born without fully functioning lungs. But let's also recognize the advances in neonatology. You've done studies on John F. Kennedy. He lost his son over hyaline lung disease, which today is a routine treatment. So again, be very careful when you say, well, there's no chance this child can live outside the womb. How many times over the years have we been told that and then found out that they actually did live outside the womb?
Exactly, because there's anecdotes for one side, but if we're going to use anecdotes for weighing evidence, we've got to use anecdotes for the other side as well. And even though the child might be positioned in such a way that it might not be completely and fully healthy as soon as it enters into this world, or rather exits the mother's womb, what we continue to see is that medical advances are progressing to such in a way that allow children to be able to experience the fullness of life. And then when we come back from the break, to be able to see to start viewing children with special needs not as liabilities but as assets.
Yes.
Is what really what an individual with the last name Brooks, Arthur in this instance, has been kind of petitioning. And so we're going to be back right after this commercial break. But if you want to call in, the number's 800-351-1212. Again, that number's 800-351-1212. Or you can go to facebook.com/pointofviewradio, leave your comment or question, and we'll get to it right after this.
Point of View turned life right side up for Emily's children. Emily listens in Illinois. She and her husband blissfully sent their children off each day to what she called our small, quaint public school, until Point of View led them to watch the documentary Indoctrination. She said, "We came to realize the need for us to educate our children at home. We want their education to be built on the solid foundation of Scripture." Emily said that would not have happened were it not for Point of View's bold consistency of shining light on public education. Your support for Point of View changes the future for children like Emily's. It leads people to start schools and ministries and businesses that change lives. How has the Truth Team impacted you? Please invest to bring truth to other families like Emily's. Support Truth today. Visit pointofview.net/team. or call 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am Nick Pitts, and I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable on Point of View today by Kerby Anderson. And we have been talking about David Brooks and his piece in the New York Times from last week entitled The Abortion Memo, where he channeled the idea of being an imaginary consultant for the Democratic Party and advising them to be able to expand the base, broaden the tent, to be able to allow pro-lifers into the tent of the Democratic Party. And so we have been taking phone calls as well as taking some questions as well online at the Point of View Radio website. And so you can go specifically to the Facebook website at www.facebook.com/Point of View Radio, or you can call in. We're taking your phone calls, 800-351-1212. And for my fellow millennials out there, the telephone is that thing you text on and check your social media on. Sometimes I always forget where the actual phone function is, but nevertheless, there is a calling function on your cell phone. And so we're going to take some phone calls right now. We've got Tara from Alaska right now. Tara, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hey, Tara, what is your point of view?
Well, my point of view is, first of all, I put God ahead of my life, period. But I don't always make the right choices, and I didn't as a young woman. But the right choice that I did make, through a divorce that I kept my daughter. She was born 5 months early due to just some complications with emotions during the divorce. And I thank God that I made the right choice, because her name is Jade. She's 20 now, and they said that she probably wouldn't even make it past the first day. But I trusted God. I stood on his promises, and she is a healthy 21-year-old young lady.
Oh, praise God.
Beautiful. And I have another daughter who was diagnosed with Down syndrome while I was pregnant. And I, too, made that choice to keep her, even though she was, quote, unquote, an unperfect, specimen. But I chose to keep her because I, too, am not perfect. And thank God I did. She is a beautiful young lady. And God is just, if you make that first right choice, he'll help you along the way with every step on the rest of your choices. And I just thank God, because they blessed my life.
That is so good. Thank you so much.
You blessed us with that testimony.
Tara,
Thank you so much,
Tara, for that word. You are right in the sense that that God does provide for our every need in Christ Jesus, is what it says in Philippians 4:19. And then one verse I always often take to heart is the idea from 2 Peter 1:3 that he's given us all things pertaining to life and godliness.
Yeah.
And to really make some of those tough decisions, it might seem tough in the moment, but then one of the beautiful things about what God does is he doesn't always take us out of situations, but he always sees us through them. And his grace is always sufficient for us, and his power is always made perfect in our weaknesses. But Kerby, it really does. It's this shift that Tara was thinking through and kind of articulated. It's the idea that these children are seen as liabilities in our culture today, just because of some of the healthcare costs that's associated with children with special needs. But in reality, one of the things that Arthur Brooks illuminates is the idea that these children should be seen as assets in our community, because they do accentuate life to a large degree, right?
Well, and again, as you may know, a couple of weeks ago at this time, I was in Europe. And one of the things we talked about is abortion and bioethics and everything. Matter of fact, tomorrow we're going to talk about cloning and genetic engineering in the first hour. But it was interesting that in Europe, they're well aware of something that was mentioned recently in Breakpoint, that in Iceland right now, they're actually rejoicing that they might completely get rid of Down syndrome children because they use CVS and amniocentesis and those kind of things to identify if a child maybe has Down syndrome, and then they almost always call for an abortion. And just think about how crass that is, to say that I'm going to assume that a Down's child is not a life worth living. Any of us that have ever been any kind of ministry with children with various needs recognize that sometimes they're the happiest bunch of children that you can be around. There was a time in Calvin's Geneva, I've heard, where they actually saw that a Down's child was a blessing, an actual blessed child. So have we not turned everything on its head, where we no longer see the value of every individual created in the image of God?
Wow. And so, I'm personally grateful for those individuals in my life that I've gotten to know. That really have. I grew up in a home where my mother worked specifically. She led up a group of developmentally disabled adults. And one of the beautiful things that just continued, it has affected me, not only how I spend my time today, but where my money and my resources go to, is this idea that these individuals were so joyful. These individuals were so vivacious, full of life, that really changed my perspective, even as young as I'm remembering at age 4 or 5 years old, even to today. And so I'm so grateful that their parents did not decide to eradicate them, but rather went to term. And then because of that, they've blessed my life. And because of what they've done in my life, I've tried to do everything that I can to bless others as well because of what they've done. And because, again, kind of pointing back to what Arthur Brooks is really pushing right now, is not seeing children with special needs as liabilities, but really as assets, what they can bring to the community, not what they take away from the community. And especially when this Iceland instance that we just continue to see is what are the unintended consequences that are going to come from taking away these type of children, which will be very interesting. And so we're going to continue taking your phone calls. We've got Dave right now. Dave on the line. Dave, are you there?
Yes, I got a bad voice. Excuse my voice.
No, you're listening to a bad voice, Dave. So share your point of view.
Here's my question. In the Bible, is there a difference in punishment for someone that harms a pregnant woman and the unborn baby does not die, and for someone that harms a pregnant woman and the unborn baby does die?
Sure. And in Exodus, that is indeed the case, because it says if two men are fighting and there is no harm to what? The unborn child, then you might pay a penalty. But if indeed you harm a child inside the womb, then it goes on to say life for life and wound for wound, basically what's called the lex talionis. And that's a really powerful argument that in the Old Testament, a child inside the womb had the same kind of legal standing as a child outside the womb.
Yeah, I think it's important to... Excuse me, Dave. You gave me some whatever the stuff is that was in your voice. So I think it's one of the important things that we need to remember, especially when referencing the Old Testament. Is one, what we're seeing in the Old Testament is the value in the heart of God, because in recognition that the punishment that comes from some of our indiscretions, especially only for the Christian, the punishment has been taken away by the blood of Christ.
Right.
And one of the beautiful things what we see is even in the Old Testament, it's testifying to the fact that God valued as well as God saw that child in the womb as a child.
Yes.
An individual to be protected, an individual to be nurtured, an individual to be guarded with closely. And one of the beautiful things, though, for those mothers out there, because if the numbers are correct, there's going to be some mothers out there that are listening right now that have made that decision earlier in their life, or maybe just recently, that have had an abortion. And I can't imagine what you're going through. I cannot fathom the pain that you potentially could be feeling right now. But what I do know is that we have a God that has a grace that is abounding. It says in 2 Corinthians 8:7, not only is his grace abounding, but his love is unending towards us. And so if you're feeling a sense of shame or guilt because of what you've done, you need to know that you have a God that is a man that is acquainted with sorrows, and he's took the shame upon the cross in order that you might walk in confidence, knowing that his grace is sufficient.
You know, I might mention, too, that we have all sorts of pregnancy resource centers around the country. Matter of fact, there's almost 3 times as many pregnancy resource centers as abortion clinics. And if a woman is listening right now and said, you know, I'm still struggling with the shame and the regret and the pain, I was a woman exploited by abortion, I hope you'll reach out to your local pregnancy resource center, because not only are they doing, I think, an outstanding job of saving the lives of those babies, but they're also saving the lives of the women who maybe made that choice and maybe need some hope, some counseling, some encouragement. And so reach out to your pregnancy resource center, or maybe find out from your pastor where one is in your local community.
Yeah, that's just continue to be an important word, to allow the body of Christ to be the body of Christ, and not only to be able to help come alongside individuals that are hurting, but also to walk alongside individuals that continue to hurt. I think that's one of the beautiful things that Jesus has showed us, and that we can emulate him as well, that God didn't give up on us, and therefore we shouldn't give up on each other, one with another. In an increasingly lonely world, it's very easy for us to be isolated and try to pretend like we have it all together. I think one of the indicators of that, Kerby, is in Google. When Google at the very end of the year, they gave their top searches, and there was all these how-to questions were the most pervasive top searches, and how increasingly we're looking to Google to be able to answer that questions and not necessarily to our neighbor.
Well, and again, we hope to be able to do some things so that when people ask Alexa, they will actually get some biblical answers. That's something we're working behind the scenes that we'll talk about a little bit later when we're ready to announce it.
So very neat. And so there's a lot of neat things that are coming alongside, but we also want to hear from you and know that we're going to have to take one of those commercial breaks. But after that commercial break, we're going to continue to take your phone calls if you can actually get through, because it looks as though all the lines are full right now.
Yes.
So we're going to continue taking phone calls. So you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or if you don't want to wait on the line, you can jump on over to that thing called Facebook, facebook.com/Point of View Radio. And when you go over to facebook.com/pointofviewradio, you're going to see a live screen, the live video shot of us here in the studio. And you can leave a question or comment on that, or maybe a like. We'd really appreciate a like, too. Now I'm sounding needy. But nevertheless, you can you can leave a question or comment, and we'll share that on air as well. But we're going to take a commercial break, and we'll be right back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Hoosier State has taken steps to codify important religious liberty protections for Indiana's students. In April 2017, the Indiana General Assembly passed and its governor quickly signed a measure providing students with the chance to take an elective surveying the world's religions while outlining the civil liberties afforded to its students in Indiana's public schools. The new law provides each local school district the freedom to offer an elective course that will study the historical, cultural, and literary contributions of the world's major religions. At the same time, some of the critical civil liberties protected by the law include protecting the student's right to express their religious beliefs in class and class assignments, the right to pray before, during, and after the school day, and the right to access a school's facilities in the same manner that secular groups do. Of course, many of these protections are found in policies issued by the United States Department of Education. Nonetheless, it is encouraging to see a state dedicate significant legislative effort to religious liberty. Students should not be required to hide their faith at school, nor should they be punished for daring to discuss their religious beliefs while at school. Religious liberty should be our national priority. It's good to see that, at least for one state, it's a clear priority for their students. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Guide at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am Nick Pitts on this Millennial Roundtable Wednesday edition of Point of View, and I am joined in studio by Kerby Anderson, and we have been talking about the abortion memo, and specifically the Democrat, David Brooks's article last week in the New York Times that kind of functioned as an imaginary consultant in advising the Democratic Party to broaden the base and broaden the base, allowing pro-lifers into the Democratic Party to feel at home. And we were asking for some of your phone calls as well, so you can call in at 800-351-1212, or you can hop over on facebook.com/pointofviewradio to share your comment, and we'll share it online. We'll share it over air, rather, as well. And so we have got an individual on here on the line. So we've got Patrick. Patrick, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hey, Patrick, what's your point of view?
Well, you asked for pro-life Democrats to call in, and that's always been me. I think there's a lot of us that are just politically homeless these days. We'd love to vote Democrat, and we can support so much of that platform with, living wage or increased access to health care, family leave, et cetera. But we just cannot countenance voting for abortion.
So really, you identify as a pro-life. So would pro-life be that kind of that issue? Are you an individual that would classify yourself as a single issue voter? So if an individual doesn't,
unfortunately, yeah, like it's this last election was just it was wrenching for my wife and me, but we couldn't vote for either party.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And so, did you grow up being a Democrat, or was this something that came on in high school, or is this just a reason?
I grew up Catholic. I'm a proud Catholic, and so I grew up in the pro-life movement. Didn't really care too much about it till I had kids of my own. But since then, I've just become much more active in it. But it's hard to have a voice with the Democrats, my natural home, and it's tough to argue for the majority of the Republican ticket. So it's tough. And I think that's one of the most important part of Brooks's article is just it's politically stupid for the Democrats to kick so many of us out. It's a losing strategy.
Let me read just what he said, and I would think, Patrick, you would agree with all of it. But this is what, again, David Brooks said. He asked the question, do we want light-term abortion so much that we're willing to tolerate President Trump? That was one question. Do we want to give it so much that we give up our chance at congressional majorities? That was another question. And then he had one final one. Do we want it so much that we will see our agendas on poverty, immigration, income equality, and racial justice thwarted and defeated? And Patrick, I get the sense that you would say these are very good questions, and you wish some of the leaders in the Democratic Party would rethink their position. Am I right on that?
It's so frustrating to see us lose state after state after state. We had some wins nationally under Obama, but we just lost, I think, 30 states.
That's very true.
And then it's just such a losing issue. It's so strange to take such a polarizing issue and make it a litmus test for the entire party.
Yeah, that's so fascinating.
I really appreciate you calling in today.
Patrick, thank you so much for your phone call. Really do appreciate it. Yes, I think Patrick really illuminates kind of that shift, kind of growing up like as a Democrat and then just seeing kind of the party move in such a way that really has become hostile now to the pro-life movement.
Well, and you've seen a couple of things. He talked about, of course, how you've seen the governor's races and the state legislative races switch from Democrat to Republican. And then you also see individuals who were pro-life Democrats. And, we can talk about, you grew up in the South, and I didn't, but I certainly saw whether it was Sam Nunn or Phil Graham or, I even mentioned off air, Rick Perry, who was at one time a Democrat. But what moved a lot of these individuals, not all of them, from Democrat to Republican was the life issue. And again, I asked the same question that Richard John Newhouse was asking back in the 1980s. The Democratic Party has always been identified, and we can agree or disagree, but it's always been identified as really reaching out to and defending the little guy, the people that needed to be defended, to help victims. And where, in the midst of all of this, did the Democratic Party turn a blind eye to one of the most defenseless of all individuals, and those are the individuals inside the womb?
Yeah, it's just an increasingly interesting situation that the Democrats find themselves in, and we'll see if they ever move the needle. We had I work at Dallas Baptist University for full-time work, and at Dallas Baptist I lead up this Institute for Global Engagement, and we actually had Michael Weir, who was President Obama's, was in the faith-based and neighborhood initiatives office in the White House. And one of the fascinating things Michael brought up last week when he was on campus is the idea that really that Democrats have moved away from kind of that safe, legal, and rare mentality that was really adopted in the late 80s, early 90s.
Bill Clinton, yeah.
And now has just transitioned to such a way that you're having hashtag shout your abortion, right?
This was interesting because this weekend I had a chance to speak in a church in Little Rock, Arkansas. And so I flew in early because I've never been to the Clinton Presidential Library.
Hey.
And, that's like going to Disneyland for you and me, right?
Yeah,
okay, because I've been to almost all the presidential libraries, but because I've been in Little Rock, I've never had the time to go to that one. And as I'm walking through and I'm seeing some of that safe, legal, and rare and those kinds of things, I'm thinking, would the Democratic Party today even be able to nominate somebody like Bill Clinton? Because he was more of the so-called moderate Democrats. Now, I know some of our listeners are going to disagree with that, so I'm not saying that I completely agree with that, but that was the perception. But would it be possible for somebody like Bill Clinton, at least in the 1990s, and where he stood at that time, to be nominated today in the Democratic Party. And I'm just not sure that that would happen either.
Oh, yeah, I completely agree. I mean, they've moved so far. Again, and you could almost make the argument that both parties have kind of moved so far to their polls.
Yeah.
And what would it look like if we didn't have, I mean, to a certain extent, you wouldn't have George H.W. Bush, that's for sure, because Ronald Reagan very much had moved really far to the right to a certain extent and really hesitated, if you read some of the kind of his bios, about this understanding of does he want to bring on kind of a moderating force, and H.W. Bush during that 80 election was really intransigent against that. But nevertheless, that's party politics. I want to take one more phone call before we move to break. We've got Virgil in South Carolina. Virgil, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, Virgil.
First of all, I'd like to say, hey, you guys. First of all, I'd like to say I really appreciate what you guys do. I love the program, and it's so refreshing to have this type of ministry on the air. And then, you pray that others would tune in and really get educated from a spiritual perspective about a biblical worldview. I mean, I really appreciate it. I also want to make the comment of, I remember back when my wife and we had a miscarriage. And soon after that, God allowed us to be pregnant again and going out for the ultrasound. And I remember the physicians wanting us to take this test to see if there'd be any complications with our child, or that we may, perhaps look towards another direction, i.e. aborting the child. But my wife and I, our decision, we resolved that before we even went in. No, we don't want to take the test. For number one, I refuse to pay for it. And secondly, we just believe that if God blessed us with this child, he would provide a way for us to take care of this child. And that was the bottom line. So we told him, we reject that. We're just going to have our child, and we're going to see this child as a gift from God. The other thing I wanted to say is I worked for Disability and Special Needs of Beaufort, and we have a wonderful program here. Those autistic, Down syndrome, and they live normal, productive lives. They have their own job. They have their jobs, their own homes. They pay their bills. To me, I think it's a great way to show the grace of God in our community. I think God allows such people to be born for the sake of his grace to shine through believers and to give us a chance to express the love of God. And I think that the breakdown comes in the misconceptions through the ignorance of Christians unable to fathom the grace of God in a situation. And I think that comes through a lack of ministry. And that's my take on it.
That's a great word. That's a great word, Virgil. Sometimes, so often that we want to compartmentalize God, but in actuality wants to woo us in unexpected ways. And so we're going to take one of those commercial breaks, but we'll be back right after this.
How do we know the Bible is the Word of God and not merely the words of men?
The Bible subjects itself to historical verification. It puts itself at risk of inquiry.
From the American Family Association, The God Who Speaks explores the evidence of the Bible's inspiration and authority through some of the world's most respected biblical scholars.
Just answered the questions that we've had on our heart recently.
Learn more at thegodwhospeaks.org.
Once upon a time, a man sat down before a microphone and began sharing stories, news stories, personal stories, God stories. Hearts and minds were set ablaze. Organizations launched to help others. Teenagers were inspired to become lawyers, even congressmen. People like you who supported Point of View Radio the past 45 years have made that possible. You've made it happen. Yet there are more stories to be told, more hearts and minds to be shaped for the sake of our future. Visit pointofview.net and help amplify this voice with a generous gift. Pointofview.net. Click Donate Now or call 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary
because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I think y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
Why, hello. Welcome back to Point of View. I am Nick Pitts for the second hour of Point of View, the Millennial Roundtable, on this Wednesday, February 7th, 2018 day. I'm joined at the roundtable by Kerby Anderson. Kerby, how are you?
I'm doing well, and some of the other millennials couldn't be with us, but that is an unusual situation. I'm sure we'll have a full bank of millennials next Wednesday.
Well, that just means I have to up the personality of
That's
the millennial.
good.
So
You're
I'm
good
going
at that.
to continually just put out Snapchats the entire time, and then potentially, where's my avocado and toast? Nevertheless, we'll kind of move from there. But so glad you decided to join us for this second hour of Point of View, the Millennial Roundtable, for this Wednesday edition. One of the things that we were talking about really significantly, we were talking about during the first hour, is the abortion memo that was put out by David Brooks on Tuesday of last week in the New York Times. Really did outline just kind of functioning as this imaginary consultant in this article, and really just trying to advocate for the Democratic Party to be able to broaden the base by allowing pro-life individuals into the Democratic Party. And we've been taking your phone calls too, and so we've heard so many great testimonials, as well as just clarifying questions as to the kind of abortion issue from the pro-life side, and then also from the pro-choice side, and then relative to the partisan politics. How does that all make sense? And so we are going to continue taking your questions and comments on that. So you can call in at 800-351-1212. That number again is 800-351-1212. Or you can go on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio, where you can leave a question or comment on the live feed that you can actually watch the broadcast today. And if you leave that question or comment, we'll be sure to share that over air. And so we're going to continue taking phone calls. And so we've got Laura that is on the line right now. Laura, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, Laura, what is your point of view?
Well, the abortion issue is so large. I have an uncle that was born several years ago, and he was born a perfectly healthy young man. And at the age of 2, he developed a high fever, which left him either with polio or cerebral palsy. It was so many, probably 80 years ago, that they couldn't make a clear diagnosis, which rendered him to a wheelchair for the rest of his life. But his mind was perfectly fine, and my grandmother, his mother, buried 3 husbands, but he was always there for her. So if abortion continues, when are we, not we, but when are they to say that he doesn't have a productive life anymore, so why should he continue to live? It deeply concerns me at where this ends. Where does it stop? And he did end up, he was in a wheelchair and lived to far surpass the years that they thought he would live, and lived to, I think it was about 67, 68 years of age.
Wow. Laura, you do bring up a great point, right, about the viability of a human being. And so with the abortion issue, you kind of pay attention to it on the front end of the life. But then, obviously, if you work that logic to the fullest extent, it obviously works its way out to the back end of life. Well, right, Kerby? So you've got the idea of eugenics that comes into play.
You know, one of the individuals, Paul Ramsey at Princeton, when we first started studying this, because I've been around the abortion issue for a long time, he actually argued that every argument for abortion ultimately could also be used as an argument for infanticide, allowing infants to die, and euthanasia. And so Lara's really bringing up a very important point. The whole idea of moving from the idea of the sanctity of human life to evaluating people's quality of life to determine whether or not they be allowed to live, that slope runs all the way down to a lot of other issues, one of which we'll talk about tomorrow, this quest for genetic perfection and all the attempts to genetically engineer individuals. And on one hand, we certainly can use genetics to clear out and eventually eliminate various genetic diseases. But that same kind of mindset, especially from an evolutionary point of view, says, well, you know, everything around us is just a result of mass, energy, chance, and time. It's all chance. So certainly scientists in the laboratory can do a better job of driving the movement of evolution and driving our genetics and creating a super race. So you can see where this idea comes from, that eventually we'll say, well, unless this person is perfect, maybe we shouldn't just allow them to live.
Yeah,
what a sad commentary.
Yeah, it is very sad one, and also it's just, that's not just a slippery slope, but that is a greased up cliff that we would be working our way till. And so we're going to continue taking phone calls. We've got Sally in Georgia right now. Sally, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, Sally, what is your point of view?
My point of view is I got a comment for all of these ladies that's doing this awful thing to their babies. And I want to plead with them, and then I'll tell you the rest. I want to plead with them, no matter how they got pregnant, is to go ahead and have it and put it up for adoption, because there is families that's wanting them. And it's a cruel thing for them to go as long as they do and then decide to have abortion. But my first baby was normal. Then I got pregnant again. Now, this has been over 50 years. And technology is better now than it was then about saving a life. Well, I was 8 months pregnant, and I went into labor, and the baby was fully developed except for its lungs. And it lived 2 seconds after it was born. And then a few years later, I got pregnant again. And I wasn't about a month or 2 months. And the doctor, when he checked, he said that I would have problems with it. It would be deformed. I was not in a good state of frame of mind to look after one like that. And I have regretted since then of doing what I did to that child. And I'm so happy for others that's pregnant, but it upsets me so much when they go and do what they do. And it's not fair for the child when it's that big, because that's a gift from God.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to say thank you for taking my comment. I listened to you off and on, and when you was talking about this, it really caught my attention, because after I did what I did with the last one, I wanted 5 children, but none of my husbands wanted to adopt. And this really caught my attention, and I wanted to say something and speak out to the ladies that are pregnant. Please don't abort those babies. Give them up for adoption.
Yeah, that is a great word. That's a great word, Sally. Just this understanding that, one, there's just adoption can be children are a gift, but adoption is regifting, and that's the best type of regifting, that you can kind of bless another family that might not be able to have a child, but also give them the opportunity to be the family that they so desperately need and deserve. And so we're going to continue taking your phone calls, and we're going to take a break right now, but we'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Last month, the Department of Health and Human Services announced the creation of a new division within the Office of Civil Rights. There will now be a Conscience and Religious Freedom Division. The division will protect doctors, nurses, and other healthcare providers from being coerced into participating in activities that violate their consciences, such as abortion, sterilization, and assisted suicide. The proposed rules will empower the division to actually enforce multiple statutes that have been passed by Congress and signed by presidents of both parties. Unfortunately, the Obama administration unilaterally and unlawfully ignored and often undermined these regulations. The ACLU, as you might imagine, has criticized the formation of the division and even threatened legal action. Last year, the ACLU filed numerous lawsuits attacking religious accommodations in a number of cases ranging from birth control mandates to adoption. Another group that protested the announcement was Lambda Legal, fearing that this would have a negative impact on the LGBT community. This makes no sense since the division is to enforce existing law concerning health care and has nothing to do with homosexual or transgender issues. The rule mentions abortion 155 times, suicide 29 times. How many times does it mention the words LGBT or transgender? That would be 0. This new division does not deserve this criticism. It will be empowered to enforce laws that have been on the books for decades but were ignored or sometimes even rewritten by the previous administration. The head of this new division understands religious liberty because he previously worked for the First Liberty Institute. He and his agency will bring a needed corrective. Healthcare workers should not be compelled to take innocent life, even if abortion is legal. They should not be forced to participate in assisted suicide, even if it's legal in some states. That is why we need this new division. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From PureFlix, the biblical story of the last of the Hebrew judges, Samson. Rated PG-13, Samson. In theaters February 16. Information at samson.movie.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am Nick Pitts, and I'm joined today at the Millennial Roundtable by Kerby Anderson, and we have been taking your phone calls and sharing some of your comments that you left online on Facebook.com. And so we are going to continue doing that, but for those of you that want to tune in, we've been, again, that number is 800-351-1212, or on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. We've been talking about abortion, and specifically David Brooks's article this past week on the abortion memo is what he titled it, about the idea that the Democrats need to broaden the base. They could broaden the base by allowing pro-life Democrats in. And so we're going to continue taking one of those phone calls. But before we do, Kerby, I want to touch on something that I just felt the need to be able to say this. I think one of the most powerful things about testimonies, especially the ones that we've been hearing, is just how saturated in grace they are.
Yes.
And that sometimes, and again, this is, again, I understand the rationale for it, the anger that sometimes comes from the pro-life movement, because we're literally murdering children. Like, I understand that's a righteous and that's a holy anger. I believe it to be true. But one of the fascinating things is there's just something so much more palatable when it comes from just a gracious voice that understands the weight of this particular issue, right?
Well, certainly, you know, we've heard from Tara, and we've heard from Virgil and just Sally a few minutes ago. And first of all, there's two issues. Number one, the grace issue. Certainly that is one. The other is that it's a great antidote and even a response to the pro-choice argument that abortion really isn't any big deal. You know, women will just get over this. And we've had callers since the 1970s on this program that have called in and said, you know, I regret my decision that I made 40 years ago, and I'm still feeling the pain. And I could sense that even in Sally's voice there. So on the one hand, God forgives, but on the other hand, I still regret a decision that I made. right?
Yeah. And so balancing that out, wanting to have that righteous and that holy anger, that because we're recognizing that children have been murdered, but also that other side is that just as my voice is being heard by a couple other people, your voice is also going to be heard by a couple of other people, and there could potentially be individuals in your vicinity that do kind of bear that pain.
Yes.
And it's important for us to be cognizant of that. Just remembering what Jesus said, to consider others as more important than ourselves. And so we're going to jump over and take some more phone calls. And so we've got Raymond from California right now. Raymond, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. How are you doing, Nick?
Hey, Raymond, doing very well. How are you, sir?
Mighty fine. Kirby, nice to hear you on the air, too.
Thank you. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I'm just glad you guys are out there in the FIBA. You know, back in the Army days, we used to call it the FIBA, the forward edge of the battle area.
Yeah, some days we do feel like we're on the front lines. Yes, that is true.
I know. I always am amazed that you still have your mustache, all the flames you faced. That thing should have been burned off a long time ago.
Yeah. That's going to be my rationale as to why I don't have a mustache, the flames, right? And not the fact that I still can't grow a mustache, and I'm embarrassed and I'm ashamed. I can't believe I just shared that on air. But tell us your story. Tell us your opinion, Raymond.
You're a tough act to follow, my friend. You know, something happened last year, Nick and Kirby, that really broke my heart. And I understand what you guys were just saying about grace. I realize that. I've had people in my family that went through this horrible ordeal called abortion.
Yes.
And, you know, they have that almost abortion they used to call a D&C. Remember that?
Yes.
It was an abortion. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It was killing a baby. I'm sorry. Last year, we passed the 60 million mark.
Yes.
And the thing that breaks my heart about that is, as a teacher and a military history teacher, I know how many people died in the Second World War. And these are civilians and military in every country involved around the world. That number, most people agree, is 60 million. Some say as high as 70. And it's the idea, you know, I'm struck with this idea that these are babies. And you know what? These are not just babies. These are American babies. These are America's next generation of doctors and lawyers and millennials like you, Nick, that have a different point of view. I'm a 60-year-old man. I could not tap your brain with a screwdriver. You know, there's stuff going on in your head that I can't even imagine just because of the different age that you're from, you know, really. And vice versa.
Yep.
I could go back and reminisce with things about you that you'd go, huh? You know? So the bottom line is something has to change. You know, we all know that what the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. We've colored this thing a dozen different ways. We've stacked it, unstacked it, restacked it, put it in the dark, put it in the light, put it in the closet, put it wherever we had to put it, and it's still the same. We're still killing America's babies. And we have to reconsider. There's got to be a better solution. And I'll let you guys debate that while I step off the air. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your ministry.
Oh, thank you so much, Raymond, for your phone call. I think Kerby, he brings up a great point. It's this understanding that I think there's one side that continues just to say that this is a woman's choice and this is a woman's right to be able to do that. But then there's another side that's really trying to combat that. And I guess you could say for the pro-life side, we've done really well in the sense that more millennials are pro-life than are pro-choice right now, one. And that, two, we've seen a decrease in the number of abortions that have happened in previously, probably the past 5 years, according to the statistics that we have. But we continue. What are some of the creative ways? I think that was one of the interesting things that I loved about Raymond's comment. There was that natural curiosity as to how can we try to fight this from a different angle? Because I think at the end of the day, if I want to apply my military strategy to it, we want to win. And winning isn't necessarily always overturning Roe v. Wade, but winning is the eradication of abortion, making it unthinkable. So it really does open up some new opportunities to be able to think, how can we just eradicate abortion, right?
Well, and again, there are so many ways you can do that. We did a program just recently where we talked about sidewalk counseling, and what an outstanding program that was. And, of course, we've talked about pregnancy resource centers. Also just changing the whole culture of death to the culture of life. And maybe a shout out for the moment to Senator Sass when this was being debated. He didn't take the intellectual route, although he's got a PhD and certainly is as bright as you are, if not even more bright than any of us around the table. He took the emotional route and just says, we see a baby. And when you see a baby, go, oh, or we see pictures of a baby, even if we don't know the person on a train or on a plane or somewhere, we just say, oh, let me see pictures of your children and grandchildren. He said, what we're talking about here is a baby. Can we just cut through the emotional rhetoric, the pro-choice rhetoric, or the pro-abortion rhetoric for a minute and just say, these are babies, and we are not even doing ourselves a service by talking about the fact that we can't even protect them. And, of course, Raymond points out 60 million. You have trouble getting that number. It used to be that we said, well, that's the top population of Canada. Well, that's far beyond the population of Canada now. We'll have to find some other country to use as an illustration. And then just think about, we're talking about the millennial generation today. You are in a classroom, and yet there, if you were really honest, could have empty seats on both sides of you of your peers who never made it to first grade, high school, college, simply because they were aborted. And so we are paying a penalty in that regard. Also, he talks about the doctors and lawyers. How about this? We're going to have trouble meeting the obligations of Social Security. And when you have one of the largest generations, the baby boom generation, followed by a baby bust and a millennial generation, you have created a situation that has taken that problem and made it worse because you've aborted all those potential productive individuals in America.
Yeah, so there's that illustration and that argument that you can make from the physical particular side of it. There's the Ben Sass avenue, which I would argue just needs to continue to be heralded. It's just this idea of emotion. I know
These are babies.
Yeah, I know we
know what babies are.
Yeah, I know we're living in an age in which we think that emotions are a bad thing, but in reality, emotions can be utilized. And you think about what Paul did with his intuition that got him on his second missionary journey. Like, the intuition guided him. We just called it the Holy Spirit. It wasn't reason. It wasn't logic. It wasn't empiricism, like seeing the signs along the way. It was intuition that was guiding Paul. That David Hume said it well, that our reason is but a slave to our desires. We recognize the truth that we might be individuals that can reason, but we are emotional, loving individuals that do reason. We're not reasonable individuals that have emotions. Our primary operating procedure is this loving component. Just because I have this watch on that tells me how many steps I have or haven't taken, this information doesn't change anything. It just helps me to acknowledge how lazy I am, one, and two, how many steps I need to take. I'm an emotional individual. And we all are emotional individuals. And so one of the beautiful ways when we get out into the public square that we can try to persuade individuals to our side is to utilize emotion. It doesn't say that we just eradicate all sense of logic and reason. It's rather just adding to that reason, because at the end of the day, the goal isn't to win the argument. The goal is to win the person. And one of the ways that you can win the person is by sharing some of these beautiful stories about what Ben Sass has done, about what listeners have done for the past hour. We've heard countless testimony after testimony after testimony about the power of women that have decided to choose life, or about the pain that they experienced when they didn't, but the grace that they found on the other side. These emotions are just changing me, and I'm just a single guy. And so how can we continue to do that, continue to fan that flame to make some of these arguments, not necessarily doing away with logic, but putting an emphasis upon emotion in order that we might change hearts, change minds, and at the end of the day, save children. And so you can call in and share your opinion at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can jump on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Again, that is facebook.com/pointofviewradio. We're going to take a break, and then when we get back, we're going to continue talking about this and all the more. We'll see you soon.
From PureFlix comes Samson, the biblical story of the last of the Hebrew judges. From his anointing to betrayal to redemption.
My name is Samson, and you will face the wrath of God.
Samson, rated PG-13. May be inappropriate for children under 13. In theaters February 16. More information is available at samson.movie.
Missing a day of Point of View is like Samson losing his hair. Now stay with me. Without his hair, Samson was weak, and ultimately he lost his sight. Without Point of View, you miss out on encouraging news, stories of how God is using Christians to make a difference. Instead of being strengthened, you get discouraged. And Point of View helps you see places to get involved, opportunities to apply your God-given gifts for good. Never miss a program, a Viewpoint's commentary, an important action item when you download the Point of View radio app, free from Google Play or iTunes. Take out your phone right now and download the Point of View radio app. See the difference you can make.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am Nick Pitts, and I'm joined at the round table by Kerby Anderson, and we have been taking your phone calls relative to the abortion memo that was put out by David Brooks earlier last week. And so we have been taking some of your phone calls. We'll continue doing that. 800-351-1212. Again, 800-351-1212. And you know, Kerby, there's quite a few phone calls, as you might expect right now. And so we'll go ahead and jump over to Jim in South Carolina. Jim, are you there?
Yes.
Hey, Jim, what is your point of view?
My point of view is that let's abolish abortion. And my question was, I received a notice in the mail from Students for Life in America, and they're soliciting a donation. And when I look at their mission and their purpose and their apparent success, it seems like a noble cause. And I just wondered what you know about the organization and whether or not I should support it financially and with prayer.
First of all, what I would say is that we have had some of the experts with Students for Life on the program, but it is funny that you brought that up because yesterday I had a good friend that works with Logos Software come by because Josh McDowell's in town and he's doing some things with him. And it turns out that his daughter is one of the spokespeople for Students for Life and has been working recently with Vice President Mike Pence. Mike Pence has put his seal of approval on Students for Life. And, of course, we've had some of the experts with Students for Life on the program. So if that's not enough of an endorsement that individuals that work with Josh McDowell, the Vice President of the United States, and guests that have been on Point of View, I think that gives you a little bit of an evidence of the fact that, again, this young group of real activists, pro-life activists, are worthy of your support. And so if you can pray for them, they would certainly appreciate that. And if you can financially support them, I would certainly encourage you to do the same.
Yeah, they're a great organization that continues to be that voice for the voiceless, especially, again, illuminating the idea and also the hard numbers that millennials, by and large, are pro-life. They're majority pro-life. And so we millennials might not always be aligned with conservative causes.
But on this one you are.
On this one, we
the younger
are.
you are, the more likely you are to be pro-life. It is just something that Planned Parenthood never saw coming, did they?
That is the truth. And so we're going to continue jumping over to some phone calls. And so let's go ahead and we'll jump over to Mike right now. Mike, are you there?
Yes.
Hey, Mike, what's your point of view?
Oh, well, of course, I'm about Kerby's age, so
that's really old.
Yeah, we are old, but that's okay. We're old in body and young in heart. So.
I like it.
Okay. I always said I want to die young at a very old age. So, okay, but no, of course, growing up in the 70s and stuff, I'd always thought, well, I never believe in abortion except for the mother's life. But, I have two sons, and my youngest son, his wife could not get pregnant. They did in vitro, and they had twins. And they had twins. They probably did have a choice. They didn't do it. But anyway, the little girl's almost 4 years old, 3.5, and she's wonderful. The little boy died at 7 months.
Wow.
But I would trade the 3 or 4 times I got to be with him.
Yes.
For anything. And but I seen the ultrasound after 3 days. 3 days. Can you imagine that? And 3 days, heart's pumping, have all their limbs, everything. They look perfect.
Wow.
And so I can't imagine somebody after 3 days saying, well, we need to get rid of this. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, Mike, go ahead.
And then my other son, his daughter's 7, and she was wild in there too, and I saw that stuff at 6 weeks, and we knew what she was going to be and everything. And I just can't imagine anybody to say, okay, even after 3 days, you would take this life. And I wouldn't trade my probably 20 minutes with my grandson for anything.
Yeah, Mike, you do bring up a great point, and thank you so much for sharing just what had to be a hard story and even a harder experience to live through. But it's Kerby, I always find it fascinating that the other side of the aisle wants to continue to say it's anti-science, and especially on the pro-life side, not only are we the most for science, but we're also wanting to get scientific revolution, some of the manifestations of science, into the hands of individuals so that they might be able to see the child, so they might be able to hear the child, so they might be able to know all the more about this child and not just a fetus, this child that's living inside of this mother right now.
Well, last week we had a chance to do an interview with Nancy Piercy, and her new book is called Love Thy Body. Matter of fact, my commentary coming out tomorrow deals with that as well. And she wrote it for a couple of reasons. Number one, oftentimes Christians are perceived as being kind of negative, we say don't do it and all the rest, and she wants to have a positive message. But the other reason she wrote it, and maybe the most significant, is that Christians and conservatives are oftentimes portrayed as being anti-science, and she says, no, we're really the ones that are in the scientific understanding, because we recognize that from the moment of conception we're dealing with a human being, and so they have to come up with personhood theory to say, well, it's maybe a human being, but it's not a person. We're the ones that believe that we're made in male and female, but yet the other side says, well, you could be anything you want in terms of your gender. She takes you through whether it's abortion, euthanasia, transgenderism, even the hookup culture, and said in every case, really, it's the Christian view and the biblical view of the body that actually is the better understanding, and we shouldn't be allowing individuals to call us anti-science, because actually science is on our side.
That is so true. That's so true. We're going to take another phone call. So we've got Annette right now down in Georgia. Annette, are you there?
Oh, yes, I am. How are y'all?
Hey, doing very well, Annette. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. I had just, I've been wanting to call in for the last, since y'all started, but one thing that y'all were talking about earlier is changing from a Democratic to a Republican Party because of the pro-abortion and stuff like that. And I grew up with a Democratic family, and my father was in the Union, and my brothers, and so they were just so Democrat. And so every time I went to vote, when I first started voting, I mostly went because of the family views. Mm-hmm. I'd even ask everybody. And then I got married. I even asked my husband, who was a Democrat. And then I woke up and realized I've got to start thinking for myself, and I started studying it. And the main reason I switched from being a Democrat to a Republican is because they were losing the family values. And even today, when I get in discussions with some of my friends, it just really kills me for them to love family so much, they say, and yet they can be okay with killing babies. And I said, the child is an image of God. You can't destroy that. And, and it just started breaking my heart. And then, like I said, I've never looked back, and so I've been with the Republican Party. I remember I voted for Jimmy Carter, I think mostly because he was the running for president, and he was from Georgia. But after that, I've been totally Republican since then. And another thing that amazes me is that I had a granddaughter born at 25 weeks, when a lot of people would be still aborting babies and stuff and thinking it's okay. And she was in the NICU unit for 3 months, and she will be 6 years old next month. Mm. She is so amazing, so wonderful, and my family is so blessed to have her. She wasn't even supposed to have sight. She has good vision, and so many people. I just cannot believe that they could choose to destroy something so precious. That's so precious to me. And I don't know if you got time for this, but one thing Layla said to me the other day when we were driving, she said, Grandma, I got to be quiet. And I said, why do you have to be quiet? She said, I have to listen to God. I said, has God been talking to you? She said, no, but if I don't listen for his voice, I won't hear it. A precious, like I said, she'll be 6 soon. Wow. And that's what I was blessed with at 25 weeks. There's hope, there's love, there's other people that will take these children, and I just wish the world would wake up, saying, because if we can destroy the most innocent of us, our world's not going to be right.
Wow.
And that's not me.
Thank you so much, Annette. That reminds me of Eli and Samuel, really. Just be quiet, listen for the Lord. Here I am, Lord. And so thank you so much for your phone call. And we're going to have to take one of those commercial breaks. But when we come back, we're going to kind of transition away from the abortion issue, and we're going to jump on this kind of news story that happened with a daddy-daughter dance that was canceled because of a gender-neutral policy up in New York. So you're going to want to stay tuned, because this is going to be a really interesting story that I think you'll be very interested in and might have a couple of comments. And so you can call in 800-351-1212 or jump over on Facebook.com/PointOfViewRadio. And we'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Hoosier State has taken steps to codify important religious liberty protections for Indiana's students. In April 2017, the Indiana General Assembly passed and its governor quickly signed a measure providing students with the chance to take an elective surveying the world's religions while outlining the civil liberties afforded to its students in Indiana's public schools. The new law provides each local school district the freedom to offer an elective course that will study the historical, cultural, and literary contributions of the world's major religions. At the same time, some of the critical civil liberties protected by the law include protecting a student's right to express their religious beliefs in class and class assignments, the right to pray before, during, and after the school day, and the right to access a school's facilities in the same manner that secular groups do. Of course, many of these protections are found in policies issued by the United States Department of Education. Nonetheless, it is encouraging to see a state dedicate significant legislative effort to religious liberty. Students should not be required to hide their faith at school, nor should they be punished for daring to discuss their religious beliefs while at school. Religious liberty should be our national priority. It's good to see that, at least for one state, it's a clear priority for their students. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Guide at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View, and I am Nick Pitts, and I'm joined by Kerby Anderson here at the Millennial Roundtable on this Wednesday edition of Point of View. And we are going to switch topics on you for this last little segment. We've been talking about abortion, but we figured we'd transition over to daddy-daughter dances, because that seems like it's a pretty natural transition, right, Kerby?
Oh, well, first of all, again, I appreciate your daily briefing, because I would not have known about this I probably would have eventually seen it in the news, but you covered it in your daily briefing today, so again, people can get that. But this it's just, so many times you just say, have we lost our minds? And this is a perfect example. Explain what's going on.
Okay, so we have officials have postponed the school's daddy-daughter dance due to the NYC's gender-neutral policy. It's reported at a CBS New York City. Officials opted to postpone the father-daughter dance at school in Staten Island because it excludes other genders, claiming city policies force them to scrap the tradition. Some parents say being politically correct has gone too far. As for the disappointed girls at PS 65, they've gotten ready to dance for months, some parents report. The dance is being rescheduled for March and will be open to the entire school community. Some parents are saying being politically correct is getting in the way of reinforcing this social bond. And we're left thinking, Whitney Houston wanted to dance with somebody. Ben Rector covered I Want to Dance with Somebody. And these girls are trying to echo that. But it seems as though these school officials do not want to reinforce some of those significant cultural as well as familial bonds, Kerby.
Well, again, you've posted the article here. It's the second article on our website here. And you just read these stories. One student said, I got my shoes, I got my dress. Another one says, it's really fun. I go with my dad, I see my friends. And this was canceled because we have to include other genders. Last time I looked, back to, again, science, we have male and female. And as a father of 2 daughters, what a wonderful opportunity to dance with your daughter. Mm-hmm. And they all love to go out on a date with dad. Mm-hmm. And then to have the New York school system close this down because of some harebrained policy. I'd love to hear some of our listeners if they want to call in real quickly and get their comments. But I'm sure everybody just says this issue of political correctness has gone too far.
Yeah, and so you can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number's 800-351-1212, or you can jump over facebook.com/pointofviewradio. It can share your question or comment, and we'll share that online. But one of the things I wrote in the daily briefing, I did a little bit of research, and research in Scripture overwhelmingly show the importance of being a father. I mean, you can go to Psalm 103:13, Ephesians 6:1-4. Girls with a present and loving father have greater levels of life satisfaction, higher self-esteem, are less likely to become clinically depressed, and are less likely as well to develop eating disorders. What we continue to see, instead of having to scare away the boys whenever the boys start calling, these dads are raising the bar so that their precious little girls can look for men. The dance may have been canceled, but it does leave an opening for some of those daddy-daughter dances. And Kerby is just the father of 2 girls. It's just increasingly important for a dad not only to be present, not to be loving, but also be modeling what they're looking for in a potential future mate, right?
And that is simply the case. And again, we've had interviews for the last 45 years on Point of View with individuals that talk about the fact that oftentimes a young girl perceives her value through her father. Now, I recognize a lot of young girls don't have a father present in the home. So I recognize that sometimes they figure out other ways to begin to perceive that. But if dad loves his daughter, that puts them in a whole different situation. And like you said, these are studies that have been refereed in clinical journals. These have been ones that have been evaluated that show, first of all, that a daughter with a loving father has a higher level of satisfaction, better self-esteem, less likely to get involved in any kind of aberrant behavior, drug use, sexual promiscuity, and the rest. They are less likely to be clinically depressed. And there are studies after studies after studies. Many of them have been cataloged by the Heritage Foundation, by the Family Research Center, and others that all demonstrate that fathers are very important to their daughters. And then to say that you can't have a father-daughter dance simply because of some stupid policy in New York, I'd love to hear what some of our callers have to say.
Yeah, so we've got a couple of calls right now that are coming in, but I think one of the important things, especially if I'm a church leader right now, is to understand that, yes, the church is a place to be able to, for the people of God to be able to gather together. But I love one of the movements that's happening right now in a lot of churches is this emphasis upon family ministry.
Yes.
Of really trying to, it's not necessarily I'm giving my kids over to the youth ministry, but really having the youth minister and the children's minister, et cetera, come alongside. And how can they model as well as how can they equip fathers, in this instance, fathers specifically, to be able to be a good father to their daughters? Because again, one of the beautiful things about the American experiment is it's given us this freedom in order that the church might be the church. And one of the ways that the church can be the church is to be able to equip the saints to do the work of the ministry. And your first ministry is going to be your family, right?
Yeah, well, shout out to Focus on the Family, Family Life Today, all sorts of great ministries, Marriage Savers, and on and on and on. Any organization that can come alongside the church, including your own church, to help you be more effective as a father or mother, I'm all for it.
And so we'll take one of those phone calls right now. We've got Krista in Virginia right now. Krista, are you there?
I am.
Hey,
Hello.
Krista, what's your point of view?
Well, growing up, my father took my sister and I to many father-daughter dances. I'm sure he probably felt awkward as we're stepping on his toes and fighting over who gets to dance with Dad. But it was really beautiful because that's what we got to see him do with our mom. They would dance in our living room, and he would always make us feel beautiful, just like our future spouses should do. And it was just a really cherished moment. The biggest problem should only ever be fighting with your sister about who gets to dance with him.
Yeah, I had 2 daughters, so they fight over dad, too. I've been down that road.
Oh,
Got that one.
I mean, it's a good problem to have.
Yeah, it sure is.
That is great. Thank you so much for your phone call, Krista. And like Kerby mentioned so graciously, one of the ways that article was accentuated is because we highlighted it. I highlighted it in the daily briefing. Daily briefing is just this. It's an email that I send out every morning that tries to highlight the day's news. And so typically there's around 8 news articles. And so there's 8 news articles that, one, highlight news that's going to be driving the day, what individuals are going to be talking about. And then the second component is news that reveals the spirit of the day. And that news that reveals the spirit of the day is kind of some of that social science research that goes on. So
let me just mention, too, that it's the 4th article. And if you go to that 4th article, the middle one says subscribe. And I subscribe, and this is just a must-reading every day. So let me encourage you to go there and subscribe to the Daily Briefing.
Well, you're very kind. And so really just trying to help Christians specifically better understand the news of the day and then how to think about it from a biblical perspective. And every once in a while to put in a song lyric or two to try to make it a little bit more funny.
You think? You know more about music than anybody I know. It's just hilarious.
A little bit more palatable. So you can sign up for the Daily Briefing at thebriefing.net, or you can hop on over to the Point of View webpage, pointofview.net, and subscribe to it from there as well. There's a link to it. So, Kerby, we're coming to the end of the show, but tell our listeners what they're going to be hearing about tomorrow.
Well, I think we've already alluded to it a little bit. First hour, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about genetic engineering and cloning. Just when I was over in Europe, it turned out they were able to clone a monkey in Scotland when I was there, so we'll talk about that in the first hour. Second hour, there has been this article that came out by Glenn Stanton and some others that have said, well, the church is doing just fine, and we said, I don't really think so. So we're going to bring Steve Cable back in here, who's been an expert on this, to really kind of give us the accurate facts about the fact that we really are moving into kind of a post-Christian world, and that's going to be important for us to understand that and to develop church programs to be more effective. So that's the 2 hours tomorrow.
Yeah, it really is. I can't wait to listen, because you really are trying to help the church to be able to understand reality. And I think about leadership. I think Max Dupree is probably the one kind of definition of leadership that I really find to be very kind of captivating in this particular instance, is that the first task of the leader is to define reality.
Right.
And to understand the battlefield that's before us. And so one of the beautiful things is that Point of View is continually helping us to better understand the culture that's around us. And 2, trying to equip as well as try to position you in such a way that you might be effective, not only for the kingdom of God, but also for the joy of your soul. And so thank you so much for tuning in. I am Nick Pitts, and this is Kerby Anderson. We thank you so much for being on the Millennial Roundtable, and we will be back very soon. See you then.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us.